Chapter 29. Cam. Cam faced the slough to the east. Though he couldn't see the snaking body of water, he knew it wasn't far from where they were posted. Screw it, he thought, and got to his feet. He crept toward the rear of the building, his eyes fairly well acclimated to the lack of artificial light as he moved forward. He tried his best not to kick some child's toy or trip over a landscaping light. When he reached the edge of the building, he could make out the slough and the D Street bridge that spanned the water slightly to the north. The sound of the idling diesel was also much louder than it had been up front. This told him the vehicle was almost certainly positioned close to the start of the bridge itself. Even though he knew better, he pushed forward, rifle raised, his finger just outside the trigger well, ready to flash inside if the need arose. His body felt as tight as a spring, the adrenaline coursing through his blood making him feel more alive than he could remember experiencing in recent history. At the rear corner of the building, Cam still couldn't see the cause of the diesel engine noise, so he crawled forward along the backside of the apartment complex. There were umbrellas and shrubs that he used to hide his slithering approach. Near the apartment's side closest to the noise, he found the elevation at the back of the building was lower by several feet than where the D Street bridge ran past it. The rise needed to span the water placed D Street approximately 10 feet above the back patio area of the apartment building. This served his clandestine approach perfectly. Along the D Street side of the apartment building were a series of doors with built-in alcoves, the kind that allowed someone searching for a key during inclement weather to get out of the elements while they rifled through pockets or a purse. At the edge of the building nearest D Street, Cam spotted the source of the engine noise. An APC so massive it looked like a prehistoric monster was parked alongside the building. Its rear hatch faced Cam and was ajar. 6 KPA soldiers huddled next to it in an effort to absorb the heat emanating from the vehicle's belly. Cam wasn't cold, but he'd been pumping the pedals of his bicycle. He took one last look at the APC and men standing around its rear hatch before inching his way back to the rear of the building. Once he was out of the KPA soldiers' line of sight, he got to his feet and snuck back to where Tim and a not-so-happy Mike waited impatiently. "Let us know when you're going on walkabout," Mike whispered, the irritation clear in his voice. "Now what did you see?" Cam relayed what he'd seen, then listened as Mike explained there were more KPA soldiers lurking in some of the alcoves on the south side of the street, trying to stay out of the wind. He estimated around 10 men in all were manning the checkpoint, and most of them were outside the vehicle. Still whispering, Mike explained they now had a better understanding of what the soldiers were doing in town. "They're controlling movement across the slough for some reason. Maybe because the crossings are choke points they can catch people in. I don't know," he admitted. "Let's hit these guys," Cam urged. Mike nodded, then pointed over his shoulder. "Across the street from that APC is a parking garage. I'm going up there to shoot. You two come in from the back where you just were." He looked at Cam. "Tim and I can coordinate on the radio after we're all in position. I'll have the high ground while you two assault from the ground." Cam nodded that he understood, and the 3 men set out to get into position. Knowing Mike's movement would require more time to get to, Cam took his time. Tim followed suit. Once Cam reached his launch point, it was a little unnerving just how close he was to their enemy. He could hear the occasional exchange between soldiers and smell the stench of their crappy cigarette smoke. He wondered how long it would take before they were looting stores for American cigarettes. The sidewalk he hunkered down on sloped gently up toward D Street where the APC sat. The soldiers in the alcoves hung back in the shadows, their faces lit occasionally when they pulled on their smokes. Cam could only see 3 of the soldiers in the alcoves, but if he crouched and peered over the edge of the street, he could make out at least 6 KPA soldiers at the back of the huge vehicle. He was sure he could single-handedly kill all the men at the back of the APC before they figured out what was happening. It would be like shooting ducks in a barrel, he thought to himself. He wasn't at all reflective about the impending violence. Suddenly, he recognized he'd evolved back to his days as a Marine, almost without realizing it. He held his weapon high, the stock tight against his shoulder, while he mentally and physically rehearsed how he was going to rain down hell on the invaders. He would shoot the men closest to the right first. That would drive the remaining soldiers toward the alcoves where they would have no cover, and he would have free rein to dispatch them at will. 3, 4, 8 times he rehearsed the sequence of shots he'd take before he relaxed back into the shadows next to Tim. "Mike's moving into position now," Tim breathed into his ear. Cam drew a deep breath and wrinkled his nose as he focused his gaze toward his targets. No hesitation lingered in his body to try to stay his hands from violence. Somehow, he felt quite the opposite. He felt like killing. He felt like killing as many of those North Korean soldiers as he could. The more he killed, the less there'd be on American soil to loot businesses, imprison innocent civilians, and take that which was not theirs to take from his country. His mind was changing on the fly, pushing him toward the darkness of war. He was going willingly, happy to kill to protect that which his forefathers had built. He was in the zone, coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike when Tim nudged him. "Mike is letting us initiate." Cam rose slowly to his feet and scanned the alcoves in the street where the APC was parked. He found all the KPA soldiers in the same general areas he had rehearsed killing them in just minutes before. Taking a deep breath to steel himself against the chaos ahead, he slid forward several feet and sensed Tim following him. His breath came in quick, ragged gasps as his body spun into combat mode, heightening some senses while shutting down others. He pushed the selector lever on his rifle to its firing position and rose above the edge of the street, his lower body covered by the difference between the apartment building's flat grade and the sloping grade of D Street. The edge of the sidewalk along D Street was guarded by a railing that he and Tim would need to shoot through. Carefully, he pushed his muzzle past the metal strand of cable in the guard railing. He didn't want any rounds to impact the steel inches in front of his face and cause any sort of eye injury. Tim pushed his own rifle through to Cam's right, and for that, Cam was thankful. Were Tim to fire from his left, hot brass would have been a factor. Now, Tim would be the recipient of Cam's hot brass once the shooting began. It was a small comforts in life, he thought to himself, before refocusing on the job at hand. His first 3 shots found their mark, and 3 KPA soldiers plummeted straight to the cold, hard pavement. His 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds impacted the APC, making snapping metallic sounds before he was able to slow his rate of fire, then reacquire the targets, diving to his left and toward certain death in the alcoves. The much quieter snaps of Mike's suppressed rounds cracked from the parking garage, and Cam took a split second in between shots to glance in that direction, searching for Mike's muzzle flashes. He saw nothing, and marveled at the suppressor technology on the market these days. Mike's rifle was outfitted with a surefire suppressor made especially for the military. The can was not the quietest on the market, but it hid the weapon's flash very well and was virtually indestructible. Cam angled to his left and picked up a shower of sparks as one of Tim's rounds must have struck a smoking KPA soldier in the face. The shower of sparks illuminated the alcove for an instant, and Cam sent more than a dozen rounds into the 4 men standing trapped in what had been designed to shelter a person. Now it kept them confined in the middle of a gunfight. Cam stumbled back at the deafening roar of the APC's main gun. He was so close to the weapon that his mouth fell open, and his ears were jarred so badly they actually ached. He wasn't sure if it was being fired at him, at Mike, or just spraying the area as an act of a panicked gunner. With no more standing targets, he aimed his rifle at the open hatch and emptied the remaining rounds from his magazine at the interior of the APC. He heard screaming from somewhere out in front of him, but it sounded distant. His ears were ringing so badly, he turned to make sure Tim wasn't yelling instructions at him. Tim was near the back of the apartment building, waving at him to follow, but he wasn't done. They'd come here to kill, and they'd done well. That was true, but what Cam wanted most of all was an information source. He turned back to the APC as the main gun erupted again with a string of fire aimed at the parking garage. He used the chaos caused by the insanely loud weapon to rush toward the closest alcove with soldiers in it. He was careful to keep his eyes on the APC's rear hatch as he ran. The alcove was nearly parallel with the back of the APC, and as he reached it, the main gun fired off another burst. The bullets tore chunks of concrete from the front face of the parking garage across the street. Cam hoped Mike was either out or on his way out with all the attention the APC's main gun was giving the Green Berets' ambush location. Inside the alcove, 5 soldiers lay in a heap, all very dead. Even in the darkness, Cam could see their wounds were horrific. He was about to push out of the alcove when he spotted hand grenades on the fallen KPA soldiers' vests. The little bombs looked a lot like the old pineapple grenades from World War II. He was wholly unfamiliar with the devices and had no idea they were Chinese-made P-86 hand grenades, but didn't much care. Their design was self-explanatory to a military man like him, and he reached for 2 of the small bombs that were attached to the closest body's vest. Getting them off proved more difficult than arming the explosive devices. He ducked as the main gun roared again. The fire wasn't directed at him. He moved toward the big APC while he worked on pulling the pin on one of the hand grenades. Once the pin was out, he launched the grenade through the open hatch and into the APC, turned, and hauled ass back toward the alcove. He had just reached what little cover the alcove provided when the muffled detonation rocked the neighborhood. There were screams from inside the vehicle, and within seconds, a man fell out of the back hatch, his body burned and disfigured. Cam leveled his rifle and shot the man twice before moving up the sidewalk toward the second alcove. The second grenade was in his pants pocket, and he held his rifle in his shoulder as he rounded the edge of the alcove, his brain, eyes, and the rifle's sight in perfect synchronization. There he found 3 soldiers down, 2 crumpled in only the way a body can lay when it no longer boasts life. A third man leaned against the wall, his right arm battered and nearly severed by one of the American's rounds. He nearly shot the man before realizing he posed no threat, then almost shot Tim as the Green Beret seemed to materialize out of thin air to his left. "Holy shit, bro, you scared the hell out of me!" Cam was shaken more by the near blue-on-blue incident than all the killing he'd just been involved in. "You just assaulted an armored vehicle basically by yourself, and you're scared of me?" Tim fired back as he tore a tourniquet off his own tactical vest and moved toward the soldier with the arm wound. "This is our guy. We've got to make sure he doesn't bleed out, though." Mike ran up from across the street, his weapon trained on the APC as though it might come back to life at any moment. "Bro, they tore that parking garage up," he huffed. When he saw Cam collecting hand grenades from the fallen soldiers, Mike joined him while Tim placed the bleed stop on the injured soldier's arm. The man screamed as the tourniquet was tightened and Tim hauled him to his feet. Looking over his shoulder toward the D Street bridge to the east, Mike shook his head. "We gotta go, boys. We don't know if they got a call off." The 2 Green Berets carried the wounded Korean between them. After 3 blocks, Cam relieved Tim for the next 4 blocks. So went the retreat to the warehouse until they suddenly became aware they'd left their bicycles on the side of the apartment building. "Want to go back and get the bikes?" Mike joked as they dragged their prisoner across the parking lot toward the front doors of the warehouse. It was still dark at 0500 hours when they entered the warehouse and headed to the back. They dropped the wounded Korean into a canvas folding chair designed for soccer moms, not violent and bloody interrogations. Roger and Roberta woke and were both equally horrified by the sight of the man's destroyed arm. "This man needs medical attention, Mike," Roberta exclaimed. "Sure does," Mike responded impassively. Roger paced in the far corner, his hands on top of his head, muttering the same curse word over and over, as if he were trying to memorize it for some obscene play he'd soon perform in. "We gave him medical treatment, ma'am," Tim pointed out, gesturing to the tourniquet. Roberta was about to argue that the man needed real medical attention at a hospital when she caught herself and came to the sharp conclusion that no such thing existed anywhere nearby anymore. "Can we turn him over to his people so they can care for him?" "Turn him over so he can be back out there in a few months slinging lead at us? No way, Roberta." The hostility in Mike's voice came through loud and clear. "He's like a disposable diaper now. We use him for information and then—" He stopped, unable to utter the words in front of people who would undoubtedly judge him based on a past system they'd grown up in. A system that had vanished on October 28th. Once the North Korean man's country invaded America, the rules were forever changed. Roberta and millions of people like her were going to struggle to come to terms with the latest laws of the jungle. The rubrics were even different than those from the wars Mike had previously fought in. Now, every enemy soldier had to be eliminated. The more dead North Koreans, the less alive ones to oppress and occupy. Either way, he's a dead man, Roberta. He died the moment he crossed into American territory, Mike said, feeling a little sententious as he continued. It ain't right, but I ain't wrong either. It's just how it's got to be if we want to protect our way of life. Every man and woman in the room knew what he was talking about, but no one spoke as Roberta's jaw flexed, her face reddening. She truly was trying to adapt, but the differences between her past and what lay ahead couldn't have been more divergent. Mike swept his gaze across the group of people, then hefted his big shoulders in a shrug. We're all going to get our hands dirty. Hell, some of us right here in this room are probably going to get killed before this is over. Again, no one spoke, but Cam could see who was on Mike's side, who wasn't, and who was on the fence about everything he was saying just by the expressions on their face. Incoming, Tim announced from the front of the warehouse, breaking up the tense, mostly one-sided exchange between Mike and Roberta.